Hello and welcome back to the Frogs of War podcast. I'm Anthony North. That's Russ Hodges. We're going to talk all things TCU athletics today and coming off the NFL draft. And it's a record NFL draft for the Horned Frogs, plus everything else happening in the TCU sports world. But first, Russ, how you doing?
Doing good. I'm recovered from a long night of sharing some drinks with some good buddies from college last Thursday, watching the first round of the draft, reacting to all the picks and all the trades. Titans not moving up in the first round for a quarterback, but you do get your guy anyway, Will Levis in the second
Man,
round. Any thoughts about that?
I know we talked about it last week. That was like my one. Please don't draft this guy. And at least they didn't do something crazy in the first round. Didn't do anything weird. But yeah, second round. I mean, yeah. Already there's the 2024 mock drafts out, and it has the Titans in the top five. And it's like we couldn't just like not take Will Levis. Like do something else. Could have had Steve Avila there instead. That's it's gonna look back as a big mistake for the Titans. But um, all in all, not too bad for the Titans. Another all these Horned Frogs get drafted and get picked up in UDFA's. None of them go to the Titans. Another year, and I'm not buying a Titans jersey yet again.
No,
It's a
hey,
bummer.
I'm in the same boat, man. I was screaming for the Bears to take Trey Tomlinson in the sixth round. I'm like, there's no reason for him to still be available at this point
Yeah.
in the draft. And they took a corner. They just took the wrong guy. I think they took a corner from Minnesota, Terrell Smith, a bigger corner. So no Bears for me either, unfortunately.
So for those Horned Frogs, got the party started on Thursday night in the first round with Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver, going number 21 overall to the Los Angeles Chargers, a franchise with a lot of connection to the Horned Frogs, of course, with LaDainian Tomlinson, Jason Verrett, and I think all Horned Frog fans are now going to be Chargers fans as the Chargers selected three frogs, but um, we pretty well expected QJ to be a first round draft pick, and he went right there in the range as four wide receivers went off the board in a row. And with Jackson Smith and Jigba going one pick ahead of QJ, and then Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers there right after. So, what do you think about the landing spot for Quentin Johnston there with the Chargers? And that this is TCU's third first round wide receiver in like the last 8 years since 2016. So, um, pretty exciting for the Frogs.
Yeah, we talked last week about where we felt Quentin Johnston could be drafted, and I believe I said anywhere from the 15 to 25 range would be a good range for him to be taken, and he was basically selected right in the middle of that range. And as you mentioned, it was a string of four consecutive receivers that went from 20 to 23 with Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I thought was going to be the first one off the board, followed by Quentin Johnston and then Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison. Real quick, do got to give a shout out to my buddy Jordan Reed, who I finessed $5 from last week because he did not think QJ was going to be a first round pick.
A hater.
Cashed in that Abe Lincoln already, but no, I think this is an interesting fit to me because the Chargers have two established wide receivers already in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, who are both really talented guys. Mike Williams, of course, is a former first round pick himself, also a bigger body receiver at 6'4" or 6'5", but he's had a hard time staying healthy. He's had quite a few injuries over the last few years, and as good as Keenan Allen has been, he'll probably be drafted onto my fantasy team for the fourth year in a row. But he's getting a little bit older too, and has had a couple of injuries over the last year or so, and I'm not really sure where his deal is at. So I think the Chargers taking Quentin Johnston, getting Justin Herbert some more help. I'm really excited to see how the Chargers use him. Bringing in a new offensive coordinator and Kellen Moore, I think they're gonna do some different things on offense this year, and I think having Quentin Johnston is a really nice insurance policy should something happen to Mike Williams again this coming season, or should the Chargers ultimately choose to part ways with Keenan Allen at some point in the near future? I want to say he's, going on his age 30 or age 31 season, which is typically right around the time you start to see those upper tier wide receivers begin to fall off a little bit. So I think it's a good pick. I'm excited to see what he does, and I really enjoyed seeing his reaction after the draft. Still disappointed that he didn't get an invitation. They wasted one on Will Levis, who did not get selected and was stuck in the green room with the cameras on him constantly while his name was sliding. But really happy to see his reaction with his family and telling his mom that she can retire now. She doesn't have to work anymore. And the Chargers are getting a quality player. They're getting a player that we talked about last week with leadership intangibles. He's a proven producer, and I think he's going to come in and find his role and make an impact for the Chargers right away.
Yeah, and I think it sets up really well for him to have an extended success in the NFL, more so than those other first round wide receivers that TCU put into the league, where you get this opportunity to link up with a young superstar quarterback in Justin Herbert, to where um, they could be linked together, for the next 10 years, which is it's just an excellent situation for a wide receiver to go into. He is not required to go carry this offense from day one. He's not required to go put up ridiculous fantasy numbers or anything like that. He's going to come in and do a job and help this team perhaps continue further into the NFL playoffs and perhaps to a Super Bowl. So exciting for Quentin Johnston. Into day two, there were two more Horned Frogs selected, one each in the second and the third round, with Steve Avila going 36th overall to the LA Rams and Kendre Miller going 71st overall to the New Orleans Saints. This again fell pretty well right in the range that we discussed last week. And another Horned Frog headed to Los Angeles, but to the other team. And again, I think these are just it's really exciting to see these Horned Frogs selected. Steve Avila steps into an offensive line where he will almost certainly be a starter right away at one of the guard positions, perhaps next to Joseph Noteboom from former Horned Frog himself. So a Horned Frog offensive line reunion there, and I'm not totally sure that the Rams are on the same level as the Chargers. I don't think the Rams are likely contenders for big things ahead in going deep into a playoff run or anything. But selecting Steve Avila here locks in a starting spot on their offensive line for many years to come, I would think.
Yeah, Steve Avila, 36th overall, early second round pick. Like you said, it's where we thought he would go. And for the Rams, you have to start somewhere. I think their window of going heavy on trade acquisitions and high salaries, I think that window has come to a close. They've moved a few guys, some veteran players like Allen Robinson and Jalen Ramsey. They still have Stafford, they still have Cooper Cup, so you know that they're going to be a threat. But for anyone who watched the Rams last year or even the year before that, their offensive line has been trash over the last couple of years. Just really, really bad. They can't get anything going in the run game, and Stafford has been hit like crazy. So getting a plug and play interior lineman who can come in and play right away and do a really good job. I think he's probably, if I had to guess, he'll come in and play left guard. I know they have a veteran center, Brian Allen, who's a good player. They gave a short-term contract extension to recently. If they should choose to move on from him in the next couple of years, they could maybe pivot with Avila and play him at center. I think he's good enough to play either position. But I really like the pick for the Rams, and then Kendre Miller going early third to the Saints at 71 overall. I really like this pick too because you have Alvin Kamara, who's going to be suspended for the first chunk of the season because of that incident that happened about a year and a half ago, where the court hearings kept getting delayed and delayed to the point where now they got to finally do something about it. So he's going to miss some time, and they brought in Jamal Williams from the Lions, who's a veteran back. He's been around for a while, but it was a short-term deal. So I think Kendre Miller is going to get a pretty considerable amount of run over the early part of the season. It might taper off a little bit when Kamara comes back because you'll essentially have Kendre Miller become the third string back at that point. But the Saints last couple of years haven't had a whole lot of depth at the running back position. It's basically been Kamara and maybe sprinkle in a little bit of the remnants of Mark Ingram every once in a while. But the Saints are getting a guy with fresh legs who is going to hopefully be healthy. We've talked about how he wasn't able to do any of the combine workouts or the pro day stuff because of that knee injury, but um, the running backs as a whole, I think went earlier than I thought they would. Bijan Robinson, not too
Top 10.
surprising that he goes top 10 because the Falcons, honestly, I felt were in a position where they could have taken anybody at that pick. I think they just took the best player available and someone that they know can come in and help sell tickets, considering they don't have a lot of talent elsewhere on that team. But uh, Jahmyr Gibbs going 12th overall to the Lions, I think might have been the worst pick of the entire first round. Um, Jahmyr, and not that Jahmyr Gibbs is a bad player, but I thought he was going to go at
They
the
could have gotten
very
him at that
end.
next pick later
They
on
could
for
have gotten
sure.
him or they could have even traded down one or two more times and gotten him in the mid to late 20s. Not sure why and on top of that, they trade away DeAndre Swift, who must have been in the doghouse, but I didn't like that pick for the Lions. But he goes 12, a running back, and then Zach Charbonnet from UCLA goes, I believe, early second to the Seahawks. So the running backs were going a little bit earlier than I thought. So not a huge surprise that Kendre Miller goes early third round. He's a good enough player to go in that range, and he's going to be coming into a spot where he's going to be able to get on the field right away. So I really like that pick, and then Steve Avila, I like that selection as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Kendre is going to. I really hope that he gets healthy and gets healthy quick. I don't. He's not a guy that's been like injury prone or anything. So this was an injury that came at in the postseason, and I think he should be expected to be back certainly by start of the season, preseason, and probably most of the off season camps and everything. So hope he is back healthy, and if he is, he'll be a dangerous force down there. It will be kind of fun already. The Saints and Falcons fans are kind of chirping at each other. The Bijan versus Kendre kind of. I guess they'll be going head to head in the division there, so that'll be fun to watch through the years. Um, Moving on to the day 3 selections of our TCU Horned Frogs, starting with early in the 4th round, Dylan Horton went at the 108th pick to the Houston Texans, and Darius Davis was a big surprise to us. We talked about it a little bit last week, but
Mhm.
went 125 overall in the 4th round to the Los Angeles Chargers, joining up with Quentin Johnston there. Um, that one, just to speak on Davis first, that one surprised me. We discussed hey, he's got a skill. You can put him in at returner day one, and you fill a roster spot, and that's great. Um, I think that this was much earlier than I would expected to fill a role like that. So I have to think that Coach Staley and the Chargers have something up their sleeve for how to use him in the offense as well as some kind of a weapon, similar to how he was at TCU. And they'll come, Kellen Moore will come up with something creative to get him out in space and everything. But um, I guess what were your thoughts there on Davis and Horton being picked pretty early there, 4th round?
If we go back to last week, when I talked about those two guys. I believe I said Dylan Horton, in my view, was probably like a sixth round, maybe late fifth, sixth round pick. I'm on record saying I didn't think Darius Davis was going to get drafted. You know, we talked about his speed and he's got the great 40 times and he has return skills. I felt like coming in that his role in the NFL would be as a return specialist. Maybe I just whiffed on his evaluation, or the Chargers have a far different evaluation for him, because I feel that if you take a receiver in the fourth round, you clearly value him as more than a return man. And for what it's worth,
It has to be a depth piece for sure.
and for what it's worth, Kellen Moore is coming over from the Dallas Cowboys, who just signed Cavante Turpin last year, who was the USFL MVP, a former Frog that made his name as a return specialist and then developed into a legitimate offensive weapon at TCU. And you could see the Cowboys attempt to manufacture him some touches later on in the year to try to get him the ball one or two times a game on some end around action or some kind of creative action near the line of scrimmage. So perhaps the Chargers, now that Kellen Moore is there, will try and do some similar things with Darius Davis. But I was at the gym when these picks came off the board, and I was really surprised when Dylan Horton went early fourth round. I literally stopped and took my headphones off when I saw Darius Davis go in the
Yeah.
fourth round. I'm like, oh my, that was by far the biggest surprise for me. Like Horton, you could debate whether or not that's a reach at that spot. The production is there, and the numbers don't lie there. What his ceiling is as an athlete, as an NFL prospect, I'm not sure, but. Uh, Darius Davis, yeah, that was by far the biggest of all the TCU players that were drafted. That was the biggest surprise to see him drafted and to see him go in that spot over some of the other guys who went later on day three.
Yeah, I think the Chargers feel like they are in a spot where they can take luxury picks. Drafting a third starting wide receiver in the first round, drafting a return specialist who, yeah, for most teams in the league, you can't really use draft picks on that kind of depth level. You need surefire every play starters. So I think the Chargers feel their rosters in such a strong place that they can use these luxury picks. And I mean, even if he is just a return specialist, teams drafted kickers. I think Jake Moody was drafted in the third round, the kicker from Michigan.
Hmm.
Teams drafted punters. So, those guys are getting a few plays a game. Why not the return specialists? It can produce just as much value. The Horton pick, I tend to agree that this might be early. I think the Texans have uh, drafted Ross Blacklock a couple years ago on the defensive line out of TCU. Have Garrett Wallow on the team right now, and actually, I think have Jerry Hughes is with the
Hmm.
Texans now as well. So a bit of a TCU reunion there also, but um, yeah, we'll see how they expect to use him. I think he's been pretty well. A lot of the reporting already is that he will be used on the line as a down lineman, defensive lineman, which um, you know, I I would be a little bit concerned if for the Texans to put him in a role that uh, the Gary Patterson defense tried to put him in, because that he probably didn't put on his best showing in that style of defense. So in that role, so we'll see how he shakes out. But excited for him to get drafted that early. Like, yeah, I think you texted me. I was out with my kids at a playground, and I was definitely not expecting to need to get those tweets off and to get that article posted on his drafting, and especially Davis. I was very very surprised on that. Moving beyond the fourth round into the later rounds, when teams are really starting to throw darts. Um, uh, this is where finally coming off the board is Travius Hodges Tomlinson at 186 to the LA Rams, and D Winters at 216 to the San Francisco 49ers. Um, I guess maybe this is another of maybe my evaluation and my watching this TCU team this season colored differently from what scouts saw, but I really thought D Winters was a much stronger prospect than a
Mm.
sixth round pick. I thought he should have been uh, the athletic traits that he put out on at the combine and that he showed on film, his instinct in coverage, his run stuffing, his pass rush abilities. I was shocked that he continued to fall into the 200s here, but I think he'll step into a linebacker room that has been strong there in San Francisco, and I think he might have a chance there to get some playing time pretty early, and I think San Francisco just purely got a huge steal there, and it's the same with Tomlinson. I mean, um, clearly the size did play a factor here. Teams were taking defensive backs that had nowhere near the production or the level of competition or the skill of Tomlinson and ahead of him, and it was clear that his size played a factor. And so some of these teams are just not going to draft a player. There's a threshold, and he doesn't meet that threshold, and that's that. Um, but going to the Rams, he's going to come out with a chip on his shoulder. He's going to be ready to continue to prove folks wrong, and I think he'll be an easy player to make that team and perhaps be a contributor for the Rams this season.
And part of me wonders if the size was a factor for D Winters as well, because I know he
Hmm.
played outside backer with the Frogs, and this past year he was really effective as a pass rusher and one of the leading sackers on the team. I think he finished with 8.5 sacks, and that may not necessarily be the role that he has as an outside linebacker in the NFL. And I think he's size wise, I want to say he's like 6 foot 225, somewhere around that range, which admittedly is a little small for an outside linebacker, but he has great tackling skills. Like I rarely saw him miss tackles throughout his time at TCU, and he has all the tape to show it. So I think he and Tomlinson both have been producers at a high level for TCU over the last couple of years. It's a little unfortunate that they slipped as late as they did, but I think Tomlinson has a chance to come in and compete for playing time right away at a nickelback position, which is a really valuable position in today's NFL with all the teams that throw the ball all around the field. You need cornerbacks. It's a premium position, and if you can get a really good nickel corner out there to play in the slot against some of the more dangerous, I mean, I'm just thinking about that division in the NFC West. You're going to have to deal with Tyler Lockett in the slot sometimes. You're going to have to deal with Jackson Smith and Jigba. You're going to have to deal with Debo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. So you're going to have some talented players lining up in the slot that you're going to have to cover. So Trey Tomlinson is going to have an opportunity. I know he tweeted out, so the chip is already on the shoulder for where he was picked. You love to see that. So um, I think it's going to be exciting to watch the preseason. These two guys competing in the NFC West, and they TCU and Jeremiah Donati, the AD, might need to book a beach house, buy some property out there in LA for all these guys because, and we're going to get to the eighth and final one real quick here, but five TCU players are going to be calling Los Angeles their home this coming season. That's just from this year's draft. So um, these guys are going to have a ball, and I'm excited to see what they do.
Yeah, and I guess just to close on the Tomlinson thing, the people continue to put chips on his shoulder. we talked about the Senior Bowl denying him a spot with Jim Nagy saying we only want players who get drafted. We want all our players drafted, and he's 5'7", so we don't want him. So Tomlinson does get drafted. From the Senior Bowl roster, there were 4 defensive backs who were not drafted. That Nagy did bring to Mobile to attend his showcase there. So, I think, like I said, I think that was just a silly thing for him to have said about Hodges Tomlinson, and uh, it came to be. I think it was a total of, looks like 29 total players from the Senior Bowl were not drafted. Including 4 defensive backs, where you could have had Hodges Tomlinson instead, and help get that percentage up of drafted players. So sorry about it, Senior Bowl. Maybe next year, remember to bring all the frogs with you to Mobile. Okay, the last Horned Frog drafted, 7th round draft pick, brings TCU's total to 8 for the full draft, for the 7-round draft, which is a program record, matching a total that TCU earned in the 1957 draft, which had 30 rounds. So in the by far the most for TCU in the 7-round format currently is quarterback Max Duggan, Heisman runner-up, Davey O'Brien winner, goes number 239 to the LA Chargers. It is a party in LA, and this is just it's going to be so fun to follow this team through the offseason, through training camp and everything, as Max Duggan joins Quentin Johnston and Darius Davis with the Chargers. He comes into a quarterback room there with a very obvious number 1 in Justin Herbert, but a backup quarterback of Easton Stick, who was drafted several years ago, quite a bit earlier. I think he was a 4th round draft pick, but Easton Stick has been the backup there, and that's it. That's the entire quarterback depth chart. So Max Duggan's going to have a chance to come in and compete with Stick for that backup role, and maybe the Chargers keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Maybe they keep 1 on the practice squad, but Duggan will have every opportunity to come in there and be a cheap option and a long-term option as the backup to the starter Justin Herbert.
What I think is really cool when we look at all 8 of these players that were drafted, and real quick, I know we set the over/under last week at, I believe, 7.5, and my prediction was 8. I did not go 8 for 8. Alana Lee was one that I thought would get drafted rather than Darius Davis. But what's cool is these guys, Quentin Johnston, Steve Avila, Kenry Miller, everybody that was drafted, these were all guys that stuck with the program after Gary Patterson and TCU parted ways. Of course, we brought in some really talented transfer players last year, like Josh Newton and Johnny Hodges and Jared Wiley and others. But I just think it's cool that these guys were guys that stuck with the program. They didn't transfer out. They stayed committed with the new coach and all of the new assistants and everything. And as we wrap this topic up and transition, I'll probably make another note about a couple of former Frogs who did transfer out after the Gary Patterson departure. I'll just go ahead and lump it in here right now because I'm gonna have to say it anyway. Zach Evans and O'Shawn Mathis were both late 6th round draft picks. Both players were a part of the TCU program, transferred out after the Gary Patterson departure, and perhaps this is a cautionary tale of the grass not always being greener on the other side, because you look at the Zach Evans Kenry Miller comparison has been out there for a few years now, ever since TCU first brought him in. He transfers out and goes to Ole Miss. He can't beat out Quinshad Judkins for the starting spot,
True
and
freshman.
and he winds up being a late also to the Rams. If we want to claim Zach Evans, I guess we can say another Frog is going to the Rams. But for Kendra Miller to go.
Mathis as well was also the Rams.
Yeah, and for him, the comparison I think would be Dylan Horton going early
Hmm.
fourth round when when O'Shawn Mathis was with the Frogs. He was always the guy that I felt we were waiting and waiting and waiting for him to really break out and be that elite pass rusher in college football. And I'm not really sure if it ever happened with him. And then Dylan Horton transferred over from, I believe it was New Mexico. O'Shawn Mathis ultimately winds up leaving, and Dylan Horton has the best season of his collegiate career and gets drafted uh, about 100 spots ahead of a player who at one time was viewed as a possible blue chip NFL type DN prospect. So a cautionary tale, I think, to some of the players looking to transfer out of Fort Worth. The grass may not always be greener on the other side as far as those pro prospects are concerned.
Yeah, I guess you have to hope that the whatever was in the bag in Oxford and in Lincoln for those two was enough to make up for the lost draft capital that they fell in the draft after leaving the Frogs. But it the thing about following this draft that had been kind of fun, and the Twitter story flipped right back to nonsense right after. But during the draft, as things are happening, eh, for the most part, the NFL people like don't care about uh, you know SEC this or like oh we're counting wins that happened in like the AP poll in 1922. Like it's just about the guys on the field, and so it was kind of a little bit refreshing to the I don't know the meritocracy of it to come out was fun, and I guess we can one of those stories that irked or set the college football world on fire a little bit and got all people ready to just out of context yell into the void at Twitter was Coach Staley from the Chargers talking about what is it about TCU players that you saw that you wanted to bring in these guys, and he answers the question, and it's a a thorough paragraph worth of answer, and he talks about they had a really good season and it's one of the best programs in college, and you see what they were able to do, and we watched a lot of their games and blah blah blah. But as part of that, he says they're one of the best they were one of the best programs in college football this season, right up there with Alabama and Georgia. And so that gets clipped by all of the SEC stands out there everywhere, and is put out there as this like ridiculous thing to say to compare this TCU team that went to the national championship and yes, got destroyed by that Georgia team, but again, 8 players drafted into the NFL. I thought it was silly the response to that of like, yeah, how, how could you have watched this college football season and been like, yeah, no, that's a ridiculous thing to say that TCU is also good. I mean, that 8 players drafted, you win a college football playoff semifinal. Uh, it clearly was TCU was one of the best programs this season. um, I don't know. I did you see any of that? Am I just like reading? Am I too online or what?
No,
What do you think?
I did see some of that, and for what it's worth, TCU had the number 4 ranking as far as number of players drafted this year. Alabama and Georgia tied for 10. Michigan was third with 9. TCU was fourth with 8, and then no other teams in college football had 8 or more players drafted. Just those 4 schools, and 3 of those 4 were college football playoff qualifiers. So. Um, has TCU been up there with Georgia and Alabama over the last 4 or 5 years? No, but this past year, yeah. I mean, you have a lot of players coming back from this national championship roster. We talked about some of the guys just a couple minutes ago, and uh, no one's saying that TCU is going to replicate what happened this past year, but there's no doubt that the program has taken a significant leap forward much sooner than many fans would have thought. And so I try not to read into that stuff too much. The numbers don't lie, and in addition to the eight guys, you have three more that signed undrafted free agent contracts, and two more that were invited to rookie mini camps, and then one that was drafted in the first round of the CFL draft here recently. So you have potentially a baker's dozen of TCU players getting pro looks this year. So I just think that's awesome. It's a historic class of athletes, like you said, and really excited to see if some of these undrafted free agents can link on and make a roster, and to see these guys that were drafted see what they can do at this next level.
Yeah, for sure. So to name those three guys, it was Tay Barber to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Alana Lee to Minnesota Vikings, and Amari DeMarcado to the Arizona Cardinals, picking up undrafted free agent deals immediately following the draft. And will they're getting some guaranteed money, and they will get looks. They will be able to go earn a spot in the NFL. I think Barber and Ali in particular have pretty good spots and good opportunities. I think in Minnesota, they only have their starting center, who's is a entrenched starter, but behind that, it's just one undrafted free agent from last season. So I think Ali could definitely step right in there and earn a roster spot. And Barber, the wide receiver group in Tampa Bay has, there's they lost several players. There's still the big names at the top with Mike Evans and the other guy whose
Chris
name is
Godwin.
escaping me, Chris something. Yeah, Godwin. There we go. But I think he also has a really good opportunity. I think DeMarcado will have a challenge. There's maybe not a lot of superstar talent anywhere in Arizona. There's maybe three or four actual good NFL players with the Cardinals, but the running back room there is pretty deep with some established veterans. So I think he'll have a challenge, but I think he's up for it. So we'll see what they do. And then yes, Gunnar Henderson and Lualo Guak also got invited to minicamp, which I think the difference there is they didn't sign any agreement. You can come out, you can it's basically like an open tryout in that case. It's you can come out, and if you earn that next, you can be signed to join for the training camp period. So Gunnar Henderson to New Orleans and Uguak to the Giants, while Uguak was also drafted in the first round of the CFL draft to Montreal, I
Yep,
think.
the Alouettes, and he is Canadian, so it does make a good degree of sense there.
Yeah, and the other thing before just closing on the NFL draft, all of these players through the undrafted free agents, I guess other than Alana Lee, these are all Gary Patterson guys, right? So, like you said about them sticking with the program, that is one piece of it, but the other side of that coin is, these are all guys who developed through the program and were brought to Fort Worth by Gary Patterson and his staff. So, as much credit as we can heap on to Sonny Dykes and the staff from the 2022 season, I think a fair amount of credit has to be given to Gary Patterson and that previous regime for identifying these guys and bringing them in, and bringing them to the point that they could have gotten this next step. So, how many of these guys get drafted if TCU doesn't have the season that they had this year? Uh, Maybe none. Honestly, I mean, I think all of these guys took big steps forward in this final season. Quentin Johnston certainly would have been drafted, and Avila would have been drafted somewhere, but I don't think anybody gets drafted as highly as they do, and a lot of these the day three guys maybe don't get drafted at all. But I think the thing to look at for that is okay, what's next? Who are the guys that Sonny Dykes is going to bring in? Through his recruiting classes and through the transfer portal uh, to have the same kind of impact to continue this going forward. Which it will be interesting to see. I don't know, Russ. Did you have anything else on the NFL draft before we moved on to the transfer editions?
It's never too early to start looking at 2024, and I'm sure there are a lot of writers who have already put together some. You mentioned at the top of the podcast the 2024 mocks already have the Titans projected to be near the top of the
Yeah.
draft. So, um, I guess the a couple of players that stick out to me that could potentially be high draft picks next year. One of them is Josh Newton. Um, Plays a premium position, has played at a really high level for the past year at TCU. If he comes back and has the kind of season that he had in 2022, I think he has a shot to be a really high draft pick because the body of work is there. He has leadership skills and he's just a ball hawk. He makes plays. He made big plays all season long last year. So he's one guy that I would keep an eye on. And I want to see if Savion Williams can make a significant leap on the offensive side of the ball this year. We know that TCU is going to have a lot of pass catching talent, and I feel like Savion Williams, being a former four-star guy, having that tremendous size at 6'5" and 220 pounds or whatever he is, he's made incremental improvements from year to year when you look at his numbers, the amount of starts, catches, receiving yards, his ability to be a threat in the red zone. I think if he can take a big step forward this coming season as a senior and really improve his route running ability and his hands and not just be a contested catch guy or just a red zone guy, be somebody who can work the intermediate part of the field, be reliable in those short yardage situations like Quentin Johnston was, I think he would have a chance to go pretty high too. So those are two guys that I'm going to be keeping an eye on for TCU going into next season.
Yeah, and while you were talking there, I was just looking up from Draft Countdown. Shane Hallam does a great job putting together a future-looking draft boards and everything. And on his latest 2024 draft board, does have uh, both Jack Beck and JoJo Earl in the top 25 of his receivers. So I think we can probably expect them to be drafted. I'm trying to get to, let's see, cornerback, see if Newton's on there. But yeah, I think Savion, and that actually leads me to another question that we don't have on the run sheet. But I was listening to, I think it was the Cover Three podcast earlier, and they were talking about what of the drafted players are going to be the most difficult to replace. And I was thinking about that in the context of TCU. What of these guys that TCU just sent into the NFL is going to be what's going to be the biggest hole that heads into the 2023 football season for the Horned Frogs from these departures? I didn't give you a chance to think about that one, but did you have a thought just off the top of your head?
That's tough because TCU had so many different positions taken in the draft. Like you have a defensive end in Dylan Horton, you have a linebacker, you have a cornerback, you have two receivers, a quarterback, and an offensive lineman and a running back. So that's so many different position groups. And I think to be honest, when I look at this group, I'm going to say that Steve Avila is going to be the most difficult to replace. And the reason I don't say Quentin Johnston or Kendre Miller is because TCU did bring in Trey Sanders through the portal. They have Amani Bailey coming back. They have Trent Bell coming back. Not to mention the plethora of receivers that are coming back, not just JoJo Earl and Jack Beck, but also John Paul Richardson from Oklahoma State, Dylan Wright from Minnesota, and Jalen Robinson from Ole Miss, in addition to the guys that are coming back like Savion Williams and the four-star freshman Cordell Russell coming in. So just by depth alone, I think you're gonna be able to fill those holes. But losing Steve Avila, who was a All-American player at a position that he didn't even start his career at. I mean, he was a first team all Big 12 center that moved to guard and played at an All-American level. And I have some concerns about TCU's offensive line coming into next season because you're losing three starters with Wes Harris and Alana Lee, but also Steve Avila. You do have your two tackles coming back in Brandon Coleman and Andrew Coker, but you're going to be hoping for some guys, maybe Willis Patrick, the transfer from Jackson State, Colton Deary, the Maryland transfer who's coming in now. We'll talk about the transfers here in a minute. They're going to need some guys to really step up and secure that interior next season, especially because you have Chandler Morris taking over for Max Duggan, and we know that Chandler Morris has had some injuries over the last couple of years, and he's not really the biggest guy. So that one would be Steve Avila for me. I think he's going to be the toughest to replace.
I think that's probably the right answer, and in combination with losing Ali on the offensive line, I think it's going to be a tough replacement. It's crazy to think that you lose a Heisman runner up, Davey O'Brien winning quarterback, and that's probably not even top 4 or 5 on this on the list. I think the other one would be Tomlinson at cornerback. I think that TCU has Josh Newton coming back, but outside of that, I think it's a lot of unknown. Brought in some transfers, Channing Canada, Avery Helm, and we'll see what they're able to do if they're able to step in and be a huge contributor like Newton was out of the transfer portal last season. But I think that's a spot. There was nobody just waiting in the wings to step in to fill a role in the way that Travis Hodges Tomlinson was. So I think that's a concerning spot on the TCU roster with him departing as well. All right, we'll move off the draft. We spent the entire podcast on the draft. You can tell that this is the two of us. We enjoy the NFL draft. These have been two fun podcasts, and it's been especially exciting NFL draft for the Horned Frogs. Obviously, all of these guys, and very exciting to see what they all do in professional football. But moving to the football off season for TCU and into the 2023 season. So the spring transfer portal window has officially closed. So the folks on the roster will remain on the roster. So no more entries into the transfer portal for this offseason. But TCU did pick up 2 new additions since we last talked, both in the trenches, one each, offense and defense. So like you said, adding Maryland interior offensive lineman Colton Deary and also Missouri State defensive tackle Tico Brown. What do these guys bring to the Horned Frogs, and can we expect them to be contributors here in the 2023 season?
So Deary actually played in 10 games last season and had 2 starts for Maryland as a freshman. Played center, which is a position that TCU is going to need to address this coming season because you are losing Alana Lee. I know there were some reports earlier in spring camp that John Lands, who's a veteran guard, had transitioned inside to center, and I know they have that Arizona State transfer, Dotson Oyatad. I don't know if he's going to be a factor there, but they needed some depth at the interior, particularly the center position. So Deary's someone who's going to have a chance, I think, to come in and compete for a spot on the 2 deep right away. And then Tico Brown is, I think, a depth piece for the defensive line as well. He's a experienced player. He spent the bulk of his career at Central Michigan and then transferred to Missouri State. I believe he's going to be a 5th or 6th year player this coming season. I want to say it might be his 6th year because he's a redshirt senior already. So taking the super senior COVID lap and coming back for the Frogs to fill some depth on the defensive line. And it's needed depth because you're losing, again, Dylan Horton, you lose Terrell Cooper, you lose George Ellis, you lost a couple of guys to the transfer portal and Doug Blue Eli and Colt Ellison. So you're kind of reloading on the defensive line a little bit. Um, Rick D'Abreu from East Carolina is going to be coming in at some point. He'll probably be a factor there too. And then Garrett Hayes, the offensive lineman who was a big four-star recruit several years ago, has apparently changed to the defensive line
Hmm.
now as well. And that was something that I guess was a spring camp transition for him. So um, I'll be curious to see if he sticks there. I feel like the Frogs have enough depth now that they could probably move him back to offense because I felt like he was going to be a potential starter at either left
Could have
guard
been
or
on the top line of the depth chart. Yeah.
that's what I because he was number two on the depth chart at one of the guard positions last year, but I don't know. I trust Coach Ricker and Coach Dykes to figure that out. So no, I think these are two guys who are good additions to the depth chart, and we'll look forward to see what they do this coming year.
All right, for sure. So we'll move into some of the other things around TCU. The TCU beach volleyball team went into its postseason play last weekend and lost its first game in a pretty bad fashion, getting swept right away by Grand Canyon in the first round. But was able to come out of the losers bracket and take wins uh, right through the rest of the tournament, and matching back up with Grand Canyon in the finals and coming away with the 3-0 win at the end, taking it back to lift that trophy at the end. And along the way, got some big wins along the way, taking down Florida State and LSU and Missouri State before getting there. So I think that's a huge achievement for that team. I don't think they've won the conference tournament before, despite being the number one seed a couple years in a row. But it wasn't enough to get them up to the number one, back up to the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament, as that bracket got released over the weekend, and TCU ended up as the number 2 overall seed there, and will match up with Stetson in the first round. And this season, taking a look at the bracket, I think there's some reason to be concerned about that being number 2 instead of number 1. And we'll talk about this with tennis as well. But um, for the Sandy Frogs, have a pretty good path to move forward. But this season, it's a single elimination tournament there in Gulf Shores, Alabama. So straight away, that the every point, every match will count. So they've taken down Stetson earlier in the season. I think they had a 5-0 sweep
Mhm.
sometime earlier this year. But Stetson has been a strong program throughout the season, and will pose a tough threat to the Frogs in round 1, and could potentially be setting up for a matchup with Grand Canyon again in that second round if the seeds play out. So exciting for beach volleyball. I think things kick off this weekend on Friday. Is the first match, so maybe Friday afternoon, and so hopefully we're able to follow the Frogs all through the weekend on their path to a national championship.
Yeah, this team is extremely battle tested when you look at the schedule, the amount of ranked teams that TCU has faced, and the team deserves a lot of credit for overcoming that loss. I believe it was I mean, they've only lost two matches, but the first time that TCU had been swept in a match all season in the very first round of the tournament, where it's a pretty big upset because TCU, I believe, had already beaten Grand Canyon once or maybe twice during the early part of the season. So to make that kind of a losers bracket run where you have to win four matches in a row, three of them coming against top seven, top eight teams in the country. I think that says a lot about the resiliency of the athletes and the quality of the coaching that they have. It's not a surprise, I guess, that Hector Gutierrez was the CCSA Coach of the Year once again. But um, when you look at the field, the familiarity with some of these teams should definitely help. TCU having played Stetson already, having faced Grand Canyon already, and should the collision course ultimately result in a potential one versus two in the finals, an opportunity for revenge against UCLA. So really exciting. Hoping to be able to catch some of it this weekend and hoping for the best for this team.
So mentioned that men's tennis also had their bracket revealed this week. They had, I guess, a week off after winning the Big 12 tournament last weekend, and I, TCU picks up the 2 seed despite having just defeated Texas in the Big 12 tournament championship, and despite having defeated Texas earlier this season in the ITA Indoor National Championship. Texas takes the number 1 overall seed in the outdoor tournament, and TCU will have to come out of the number 2 seed. Still gets to host this regional here in Fort Worth beginning on Friday, and gets a first round matchup against UT Arlington, but sets up for a really difficult, if TCU is able to get past the Mavericks there in round 1, sets up a pretty difficult situation in round 2 where Texas A&M and SMU will be doing battle on the other side of the regional for the opportunity to potentially face the Horned Frogs in round 2, and those are two really highly rated teams. Texas A&M is a top 20 team in the country, so to be paired up in, you work all season to earn that number 2 seed. You only have 2 losses all season, and to the number 1 overall team, and you get paired with a top 20 team potentially in your second round matchup is a really kind of a tough draw out of this, and I don't know if it's a quirk or a problem or an issue, or it's just the way that the NCAA tennis sets up their bracket, kind of similar to the way the baseball tournament regionals get set up, where location ends up mattering more than like the true listing of rankings. So TCU isn't facing, the second worst other side of the region team. They're facing, I don't know, maybe second or third best other side of the region team. It's a tough setup, particularly with the Aggies if they get past SMU, but SMU's no slouch either. And I think TCU played SMU earlier this season in the indoor season, but um, I think if TCU certainly has the opportunity to lose that second round matchup um, on Saturday at 4 o'clock in Fort Worth. So hopefully Friday, 5 o'clock, TCU takes on UT Arlington at the Purple Courts. So go out for that one, cheer the Frogs on, and really come out to support that Saturday matchup. I think for the NCAA tournament, it is not free entry for like the general public. Students will get in free, but for the general public, I think it's like $5. Still worth it. Plus, they're going to have Buff Bros Pizza, so it's definitely worth it just
Ooh.
for the pizza alone. But I think if TCU gets through that kind of difficult draw, things might open up for them there beyond that in the bracket, and potentially again setting up a fifth showdown with the Longhorns in the national championship. I think that would be one incredible story, and will be exciting to follow the Frogs through this NCAA tournament.
Yeah, TCU definitely wants that run back, that game 5 between the Frogs and the Horns. And just a shout out to all the individuals on the team that received invites to the. I'm guessing they do it similar to wrestling in the sense that you have like your dual team competition, and then you have your individual competition where you're competing in singles and doubles. Not, I mean, you are representing TCU, but it's not about a team score. It's about winning your individual matchups
Exactly.
and seeing how far
Yep.
you go there. So the Frogs are going to be well represented in those individual competitions, which I believe are at the end of the month after all of the team stuff is over with. So there's still going to be plenty of men's tennis coming your way, and then also the women's tennis team that had a successful season going 13-9. They did win their first matchup of the Big 12 tournament. They are playing in the NIT Championship tournament. So I believe this is an inaugural event.
First ever. That's right.
So some postseason action for TCU, and I would expect that at least one or two of their singles players will receive NCAA tournament invitations as well in the individual side of things. So continue to follow us on Frogs at War. We're going to continue to have plenty of tennis coverage here as this month of May winds down.
Yeah, so let's see. I'm trying to pull up the names here of everybody who on the men's side got into singles. So we've got, of course, Jake Fernley, Luke Famba.
I'm
Um,
guessing JPJ was one of them.
yeah, Fernley and Famba got into the doubles
Doubles.
automatic qualifier. Um,
Is Jong and Maxted?
Jong and Maxted are at large selection, so they're in the doubles side. Um, let's see, and then yeah, so alternates. I don't. I guess that's in case someone gets hurt. I don't know. That's kind of weird. But alternates on the singles side is Sander Zhong and JPJ. Yeah, Jack Pennington Jones are there, and yeah, Fernley did not earn a top 8 seed. Shoot, he didn't earn a top 16 seed, so he's going to
He's got his
he's
work
gonna have
cut
to
out
take
for him.
that chip on his shoulder to go. I mean, he was the number one over. I think he was the number one overall seed in singles last year and lost in the first round. So maybe coming from up from the mud a little bit this season will give him a. It'll be a different look, and he'll be able to make a nice little run there. So exciting days ahead for TCU tennis teams going forward. Um, let's see the golf teams also. Let's see, men made the NCAA tournament again for the 32nd time in 33 years. Incredible run for the men's golf team, coming in second in the Big 12 championship. So that's, let's see, a couple weeks away for that to get started. Women's golf also made the NCAA tournament. That gets started next week. So exciting things there. We could talk about baseball. That's the
There
next
there
thing on
are
the
some
sheet.
positive things, and we'll run through it pretty quickly because we're over the hour mark here. But um, TCU going 2-2 over its last four games, a Big 12 series against Texas over the weekend. Kind of an interesting layout with the schedule. It was everything was postponed by one day because of bad weather, so they played Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then had the midweek on Tuesday against UT Rio Grande Valley. So I guess I'll start with the positives. Um, TCU did unfortunately lose the series 2 out of 3 against the Longhorns, but there were some notable individual performances that I think are really encouraging. Luis Rodriguez had a really nice start on Sunday for the second weekend in a row through 6 innings, had 4 strikeouts, only gave up 2 earned runs on 4 hits, and was really battling throughout the game, was able to escape some tough situations and keep TCU in the ball game. Unfortunately, it was a pitcher's duel, and Luke Savage came in relief through a scoreless seventh and then gave up a go-ahead single in the 8th inning. Garrett Wright did throw a scoreless ninth, but TCU just not able to find that equalizer late in the game. They lose the Sunday game 3-2. 8-4 loss on Saturday. Cole Klecker started this one, and this was one of his one of his worst outings of the season. The home run ball was a devastating factor for the Frogs in this one. Cole Klecker gave up 4 home runs over the first 3 innings, and Texas led 6-0 at the start of the game, and was just too big of a hole for the Frogs to pull out of. But the offense exploded in a huge way on Monday to avoid the sweep. TCU winning that game 15-7. You had Trey Richardson uh, having a huge day at the plate. Curtis Byrne and Logan Maxwell are both on a bit of a heater right now. They combined for 7 RBIs in this game. Curtis Byrne went 2 for 5 with a home run and 5 RBIs, which the 5 RBIs I'm guessing is probably a season high for him. Logan Maxwell, who hasn't really been a starter for most of the year, he's been more of a depth outfielder slash occasional DH. He's been playing quite a bit over the last few games with Luke Boyers really struggling, and you're at the point in the season now where being 8-10 in the conference with only two Big 12 sets remaining, any chance that TCU has of winning the Big 12 is gone. You hope maybe you can win the tournament, but at this point, TCU's primary objective just needs to be doing everything humanly possible to just qualify for the tournament, even if you have to get in as a 4 seed. So Kirk Saarloos making some lineup changes. Logan Maxwell moving into the starting left field spot. Curtis Byrne is starting to get some more playing time with Carson Bowen. They're splitting time between catcher and DH. Trey Richardson was phenomenal on Monday. He went 4 for 6, led all TCU players with 4 hits. Anthony Silva, the freshman, he went 3 for 5. Austin Davis was 3 for 5. It was a all around really good offensive performance to close out the series. And then following that right up on Tuesday, beating UT Rio Grande Valley 14-4. It was a run rule game. I believe it only went 7 innings. Again, Curtis Byrne and Logan Maxwell, they each had 5 RBIs in this game. So they combined for 10. They both hit home runs. So back-to-back games where they each hit home runs. I believe the one that Logan Maxwell hit on Monday was his first career collegiate home run as a Frog. So congratulations to him on that. Braden Sloan got the start on Tuesday and had one of his better outings in recent weeks. Gave up only 1 run, struck out 6, and went just about 4 innings. So encouraging start for him that he can build on going into next week. TCU will have a series against Cal State Fullerton this weekend. It is a non-conference series, of course, and these have been a sore spot for TCU for whatever reason this season. They have struggled in some of these non-conference sets. They've lost against teams like Florida State, San Diego, UC Wilmington. So really hope that TCU can buck that trend this weekend because, again, 25-20 now on the season. You're approaching your loss total from last year, and you still have a lot of baseball to play. A series against Baylor, a series against Kansas State, and a handful of midweek matchups as well. So, again, some positive individual performances from TCU over the last 4 games, but all in all, Kendall Rogers actually looked at a tweet that he put out earlier today, and TCU is not in his field of 64 right now. And Kendall Rogers is, I think, regarded as one of the best, if not the best, college baseball beat writers in the country. So TCU's got to really get some work done over these last couple of weeks. I really believe that um, if you lose this series to Cal State Fullerton this weekend, your whatever tournament hopes you still have are going to take a pretty serious punch unless you can somehow come back and sweep Baylor and sweep Kansas State, which Kansas State is having a pretty good season. I'm not sure where Baylor's at in the standings right now, but they have to play good baseball. If TCU can somehow get back to being the team that it was over the first 10 games of the season, then they may have a chance to sneak into the tournament. But otherwise, it's looking like um, it's looking like a early start to the off season.
Yeah, this Cal State Fullerton series is absolutely huge. They're approaching. They're a fringe top 40 team in RPI. They have 27 wins on the season, so you start getting wins, high level RPI wins like that, even in the non conference. It's going to be really important for the tournament resume. So TCU really needs to move up the RPI. Currently, TCU is at 54 in NCAA's RPI rankings. So you got to move up that list and start picking up wins. I think, yeah, the Baylor series you almost have to sweep. You really need to take this series, even if it's 2-1 off of Cal State Fullerton at home. Um, I think it's really it's hitting that tough. We're approaching dark days if TCU starts dropping more of these games. Very glad to see them. Last week take that game off of Dallas Baptist was huge. This week to take one off of Texas, thank goodness, to avoid the sweep was huge. But yeah, have to go in this weekend and take care of Cal State Fullerton, as difficult and as strong a program as that as the Titans are. So we've taken up enough of your time tonight, so we appreciate everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for following us at Frogs of War, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. Give us a follow, interact with us. We enjoy chatting with everyone. So with that, we'll say go Frogs.
Go Frogs.